it's not just about women leaving, but also about systems that weren't designed with women in mind, or the definitions of success that don't necessarily reflect the value of women.
Hello, I'm Karen Horting, Executive Director and CEO of the Society of Women Engineers. Welcome to Diverse, a SWE podcast. In today's episode, we're dissecting a phrase I've been hearing for well over 25 years, the leaky pipeline. It's often used to describe why women leave STEM careers. But is that language really telling the full story? I'm joined today by two engineers who are working on a book about this topic. Cassie Leonard is an aerospace engineer, author, and founder of ELMM Coaching. And Ashley Wynne is a chemical engineer, president of the Western Carolina SWE section, and the co-lead of our HeforSWE Affinity Group. Cassie and Ashley, welcome to Diverse. We're so glad to have you.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.
So let's jump in. The phrase leaky pipeline gets used to describe women leaving engineering, but it sounds passive, like they're just quietly dripping out of the system. So can you introduce yourselves and share what that language misses about what's actually happening? Cassie, do you want to start?
I'd love to. So I'm Cassie. I am a engineer turned executive coach. So I have journeyed in and around this leaky pipeline, and some might say I was a drip if we're using the leaky pipeline analogy. My journey is I was 16 years in aerospace, worked for a major aerospace company on some amazing U.S. military projects, had a fabulous career, but I just kept feeling that tension of other things that I wanted to invest my energy in. I have two kids at home, so there was a pull there. And the leaky pipeline analogy, when I chose to leave, it felt like it was such a constraint. The only narrative I knew of a woman in STEM's career is that you are in and then you succeed by making it all the way out. And I don't know if that means C-suite or like just making it to the end of your career, but I have had this guilt and this like, am I still ambitious if I leave? And how do I even identify myself as a STEM professional if I am not working in a Fortune 500 aerospace company? And so I really struggle with that whole single, rigid, two-dimensional analogy of what STEM can be for women and for everyone. It was a long journey trying to figure out how I got out and how I could still have identity and power and feel really proud about what I do. That's part of why we put this book together, is to just break apart that narrative of there is a leaky pipeline and show all the nuance and the fluidity and the changes and the power that we all can have.
Yeah, I agree. I hate that term pipeline. It sort of implies there's one way in and one way out.
Exactly.
And I think as you've started to illustrate, that's not true. There's many facets one's career can take, and it doesn't necessarily mean you've quit. Ashley, how about you?
Sure. I'm Ashley Wynne. I'm a chemical engineer. I work in R&D in product development at a packaging company, and I've been in the industry for over 10 years and 13 years working professionally. And like you said in the introduction, I spend a lot of time in SWE roles. I'm the current Western Carolina section president for another few days anyway, until the fiscal year 26 leadership takes over. And then I'm a co-lead for the HeforSWE Affinity Group. And for me, I think, as I think about what the leaky pipeline is, I think it's more complex than a dropout narrative, that it's kind of portrayed to be in the media or in different publications. There's actually a publication that I thought was really interesting by the Stanford Innovation Review that calls a leaky pipeline broken scaffolding, which I think is really interesting. It speaks to the broken foundation sometimes in engineering. And it's not just about women leaving, but also about systems that weren't designed with women in mind, or the definitions of success that don't necessarily reflect the value of women. And we've definitely seen that across a variety of perspectives, especially as a group of collaborators on the leaky pipeline and the project that we're working on.
We certainly saw that in the research SWE did back when we did our climate control study in 2016. And it was really about a lot of the various unconscious biases that women experience in engineering, sort of to your point of that broken scaffolding, systems that just aren't really designed to support women in their careers. So maybe share a little bit about how you got together and said, let's tackle this topic in a book.
I'll take that to start because I put out a call. So this is Cassie, and I wrote a book about 2 years ago where I captured my experience as a STEM mom because I felt like that narrative was missing. But that book, while wonderful, and I'm very proud of it, is all about my journey and what I've learned from my mentors. It didn't have enough voices. It didn't have the conversations that I've been hearing and having for the past 2 years since I published it. And so I put out a call last September to see if anyone wanted to join me in a conversation about mid-career attrition and retention and changing the system. And I got 25 people responding within the month. Ashley was one of the very first people to jump on. And it's been so exciting. We had brainstorming sessions and collaborative group conversations, which is hard because we have people in India, Australia, Canada, and the US. It was just so exciting to see taking that single thread pipeline, one inlet, one outlet, and looking at each person's career and how it is completely different than that rigid narrative.
Well, and I think you've hit on something as well when you mentioned all the time zones. It's a global issue. It's not just something here in the US.
Absolutely. It's also academia and corporate. We've found there's really two different streams of conversation, but there's so much intersection between the two.
Mm-hmm. And Ashley, how about for you? What caused you to see that call and say, yes, this is something I want to get involved in?
I think what really interested me about it, and I had read Cassie's book previously and enjoyed it. When I saw that call, I was thinking to myself, okay, I'm a woman who's staying in engineering. And so maybe I could provide a perspective on ways that helped me stay in engineering in hopes that others could possibly learn from what works, at least for me, and take that and maybe extend that opportunity to other women and also an opportunity to learn, right? I only have my perspective on what made me stay in engineering, but why did some people leave? And if I move into various roles throughout my career, what can I do to enable and support somebody else from different learned experiences? And also, this is a topic that's hugely important for us, as something we've discussed a lot in HeforSWE. And so it just became a really, really interesting topic, and I had to get involved. I couldn't turn it down.
Yeah. And let me just probe a little bit. So you talked about the things that you've learned or that have helped you stay in. So did you have a moment of should I stay or should I go?
I personally haven't been at the point where I've had to make a decision to stay or go. My professional experiences have largely been very positive. I had a lot of the support systems in place that allowed me to continue to pursue my career. And there are a lot of factors that make this possible. My spouse is very supportive and I have a really supportive work environment. So given that I've had that experience where my environment has been a good fit for me to continue to pursue engineering and engineering roles throughout life changes like motherhood, that's why I wanted to provide a perspective on some ways that helped me stay in engineering.
That's great. And Cassie, it sounded like you had a kind of a calling for leadership coaching, leadership development. Was it because of something that was happening in your engineering career, or has it just always been kind of a sideline passion for you?
That's a great question. The calling came to a head in 2022 when I chose to actually leave. But it was a long process of having that paradox, that conflict. I also, on paper, had a fabulous career. I made it to senior leadership within 12 years. I led teams of 60 to 100 people across the country. And I loved all of my experiences in engineering. I had the most wonderful mentors, the most supportive team members. My spouse is also very supportive. But I just couldn't sometimes get over the systemic barriers that I honestly couldn't see. And I didn't realize that that was my challenge. But there were things that were just slightly in my way, like the mom guilt and the societal expectations that when I'm on a business trip, they ask me, who's watching your kids? Whereas my husband, when he travels, would never be asked that. And so there's just all these little micro messaging that we receive. And even though I couldn't articulate it, I would never have been able to put my finger on it at that time. I was getting closer and closer to a should I stay, should I go decision for, I'd say, 12 years of that 16-year career.
Yeah, our research definitely showed the maternal wall, and that whether it's from colleagues that ask those questions or exhibit some of those behaviors, or as you said, the outside world, it is all those little micro inequities that take their toll.
Absolutely. There was one time I was in Washington, D.C. for a meeting, and I just happened to mention that it was my son's birthday, and I got so many sad faces like, oh, you made the wrong choice being here. And I was like, no, we had a great party on Saturday. We planned it, like no judgment in any direction based on my choices because everything's good. But you always notice those judgments.
Absolutely. Well, Ashley, it sounds like you've had a really supportive environment, which is as it should be. What are some of the things that have made it supportive, or things that you have felt that you're like, this is where I want to be?
I think for me, the people that you work with can make all the difference. And I felt like when I started at the company I'm at now, and I've been with the company I work for about 11 years, I had just gotten married the year before. So I was pretty early in that part of my life. I was not a mom yet. But then as my life transitioned, people were always excited, excited to hear about my new baby and excited to hear about my new husband, all that kind of stuff. So they were just generally supportive. I think something that made a big difference is the managers that you work for. They can create or sustain an environment that makes it where you can be successful. So, I've worked for the boss that I work for now, for probably 9 years out of the 11 years that I worked at my company. And I think one thing that he's done consistently that made working through some of those life transitions that could have been places where my career derailed but didn't, was that he was a consistent listener. And so he was flexible when I needed flexibility, and he never made me feel like I had to choose work over my family or anything like that. And he was listening and heard when I told him I wanted expanded projects or experiences, or I wanted to try a different role, and kind of enabled those opportunities for me. Some of them take time, right? I spent over a decade in product development before I moved into technical leadership, but the experiences built up over time added up to exposure and other opportunities. And so I think that kind of environment really allowed me to be a good mom at home and also have opportunities as well. And that's a reason why I've never really considered leaving, because I was happy in both areas of my life.
Yeah. And sounds kind of like common sense, that any good manager, whether you're managing a man or a woman, that you're listening to the employee, that you're understanding what opportunities they're looking for, that you're being flexible, right? I mean, this just helps the organization overall. It's not really an accommodation. It's more like good business. So what do you wish more leaders understood about why women leave engineering roles, even when both of you have talked about having a really robust career and moving up in leadership? What should they know?
I can start. I think that leaders need to realize that women often leave engineering roles not because of their own successes or failures, but because the environment around them is failing them. And so on paper, they might be incredibly successful, delivering results, earning promotions, doing everything right. But behind the scenes is where they might be having a hard time, that lack of flexibility or isolation. Motherhood sometimes can be isolating, or they might just not see a sustainable path that aligns with their priorities. And so I think leaders need to realize that success shouldn't require some sort of self-sacrifice. And if we want to retain women in engineering and retain that top talent, our workplaces need to be designed where women, and really all voices, can succeed without having to constantly prove that they belong, or some of those subtle exclusions or commentary that we've, talked about, or carry the weight of being the only, or overextend themselves to be seen as credible. And so that pressure to constantly prove you belong is what leads to the burnout and disengagement, or the decision to walk away altogether.
Yeah, that is exactly what our research showed. It was that prove it again, right? I'm constantly having to prove that I deserve to be there, which over time is exhausting. How about for you, Cassie? You've got 10 minutes with the CEO. What are you going to tell them about how to keep women in engineering?
It goes back to what Ashley just said. Ask questions and then listen to the answers. You don't even need 10 minutes to tell them that. But to expand on that a little bit, just paying attention to all your employees, understanding that there are undercurrents of systems. Ashley wrote a beautiful chapter in this new book on imposter syndrome and reframing it, or it's not the first time it's been reframed, but elevating the conversation that imposter syndrome is not an individual person's problem, but it is a systemic layering of barriers and challenges that erode an individual's confidence. And so that's one example of just being aware that maybe there's something going on that someone's experiencing that you might not have experienced because you had different identity, different intersecting portions of your personality. You didn't feel like you were pressured towards soft skill roles because you were a stronger communicator. You might not have felt like you were on a glass cliff at any point. You might not have ever dealt with the symptoms that many women carry from perimenopause that no man could possibly understand because they haven't experienced it. So listening and asking the questions, or even making the space so that people feel like they could come and tell you. That's what a strong leader can do to help their team.
Yeah. I feel like we need to have posters printed up at SWE that say, ask questions, then listen to the answer.
Yes.
That's sort of the silver bullet. It sounds like a lot of women responded to this call for the book project. And so we've talked about just how managers can ask questions, can listen, can be flexible. Were there some other solutions that stood out to you as you talked with the women that responded about the book?
I do want to say we also have men collaborating. The HeforSWE co-lead Trevor George wrote a chapter on allyship, and we have a few more that were collaborators on the project. But I'll answer the question on other success solutions, and then I'll pass it to Ashley. The abundance of solutions is just magical because we never wanted to write this or take this project on as a let's look at all the problems and just admire them. It was always about solutions. But there's a chapter in there by Carly Abel where she actually took her master's thesis in, I think it was operational sciences, on how to change your thoughts, habits, relationships, instincts, values, and environments, which turns into a THRIVE acronym, which is beautiful. Her thoughts on all the ways that you can self-manage your environment and your values and how you connect with the world is a solution. And then we have other beautiful messages from people on how to navigate when things get so bad that you need to bring in HR, or how to reshape the entire system. There's a lot of optimistic and there's a lot of brass tacks tactical, and we could get into so many details. So Ashley, I wonder if there's any that stood out to you from the book.
I think something that stood out to me throughout the entire process, there's no one right answer, right? Everybody's got different paths, but recognizing that contributions go beyond technical output, mentorship and communications roles that women tend to take on frequently. And also, I think it's important that companies or organizations track retention with the same enthusiasm and rigor as they track performance. And then some of the more, I hate to say obvious ones, but it seems obvious to us, put women on high impact and high visibility projects and give them that visibility and that exposure and those opportunities. And I think something that really mattered to me a lot was normalizing flexibility without penalty. And leaders can model that flexible hours, hybrid options, caregiving support, whatever that individual circumstances need to keep them in engineering or whatever role they're wanting to be in should be seen as the standard and not the exception.
Yeah, I could not agree more with that. Those are the kind of things that can help all employees, right? And so for leaders to, as you said, normalize it, I think is critical. You both mentioned the HeforSWE and our male allies. So what are some things they offered up to the book that we could highlight?
I would say that the messages from the allies were so great because it just shows how much we're not looking for women's retention. We're looking for equitable STEM workplaces where everyone is invited and feels safe, psychologically safe, all levels of safety. We also have an advocacy chapter, which was written by a woman, but everyone can be an advocate. The message was really about how much opportunity there is to support everyone around you. And I love how Trevor phrased it. Being an ally is about being visible and invisible at the same time, about asking questions and listening to the answers and not being the spotlight in the room, but being really curious. And he did a great job of capturing that message.
I love that. I mean, we can't do it alone, right? And as you said, we need everyone to be able to come and bring their authentic selves and be successful, because the need for engineers is so great right now, that really we can't afford to have anyone leaking out of the pipeline. Well, we always like to end our conversations with something our listeners can use and apply in their own situations. And so we likely have some women engineers listening to this podcast who maybe feel like they're burning out or are having that should I stay or should I go conversation. So what advice would you offer to them? And maybe Cassie, I'll ask you to jump in first, and then we'll go over to Ashley.
Sure. We mentioned success a lot of times in this conversation and helping women get to success, what success looks like. One of the nuggets that Jamie Cromier wrote in her chapter on charting your own course, she talked about having the courage to just define your own version of success and not let the end of the pipeline be the milestone that we're all trying to get to, but really knowing what it is that you want. And her quote was, measure your success with your own yardstick. And I just love it. It resonates so well with me. You can change it to meter stick if you're in the metric system, but just measuring your success based on your own goals.
Yeah, I love that. Early on in my career at SWE, we talked about success on your own terms.
Exactly.
And that may be the C-suite. It may be something else. It may be being the best individual contributor that you can be. But it's all about what does it look like to you and not to compare it to anybody else. And Ashley, how about for you? Closing thoughts, words of wisdom.
I would say if I was talking to somebody who might be questioning their place in engineering, I would ask them or tell them to ask themselves, do you still love the work, or are you just tired of how you're expected to do that work? There is a difference, and you can love problem solving and innovation and still be drained by the culture or the environment, and that you don't owe any company or role your well-being. I tell someone you have permission to pivot or pause. And sometimes what that might mean is finding a new team or a new role or new boundaries, or it might mean walking away, which can be powerful in its own way. But of course, we want women to have the option, to whatever works best for them, but envision what a satisfying and fulfilling work experience looks like to you. And if that's not what you're currently doing, then maybe find a new role or take a chance and create your own success. Like Cassie said, measure your own success on your own yardstick, or create the environment that you're looking for if what you're currently doing isn't it.
Great. Well, I want to thank Cassie Leonard and Ashley Wynne. I want to thank both of you for being here. I'm energized because I feel like this was such a positive conversation, and that there are so many ways that we can make sure that women aren't dripping out of the pipeline, unless, as Ashley said, unless taking that pause or doing something different is really what's best for you. You need that change. But I want to thank both of you for being here. And how do we get the book?
The book launches on August 12th. It's going to be available on Amazon and anywhere else you get your books. And you can always join the ELMM Coaching newsletter to get updates in advance.
Excellent. And the title of the book?
It's called Beyond the Pipeline.
Beyond the Pipeline. All right. Well, I am going to mark my calendar for August 12th so that I can jump on that and get on Amazon and get a copy of that and start getting some more tips for how we keep women in the engineering pipeline. And so thank you both for being here. Thank you for sharing. I think this is the power of the SWE community, where we come together and we do share and we support each other. So with that, I'll just say, are there any closing thoughts before we wrap it up?
I'd just like to say thank you, Karen, for hosting this conversation. And it's always so much fun to talk with Ashley.
It was a lot of fun. Thanks for having us.
Well, I'm Karen Horting, and from all of us at SWE, thanks for listening.